There's something disturbing about religious art. The eyes that follow you across the room, the wounds are rendered in more detail than they need to be. They're expressions that should feel peaceful and somehow don't. You've seen these images before in churches, in galleries, in books, and called them beautiful. But there's always been something underneath them, something you felt and never named. This video is about that feeling, where it comes from, why it was put there, and why you were always supposed to feel it. If you too are rendered in more detail than needed, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends, and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. There is a word for the feeling. In 1970, a Japanese roboticist named Masahiro Mori was studying human responses to artificial figures, mannequins, prosthetic limbs, and early robots when he noticed something nobody had formally documented before. The closer an artificial figure gets to looking human without quite reaching it, the more profoundly wrong it feels. The almost human produces a deeper unease than the obviously artificial. He called it the Uncanny Valley. He was writing about robots. But the feeling is older than robotics, psychology, and any of the language we now use to describe it. It is the feeling of standing in front of a Byzantine icon, the gold-painted religious images that lined the walls of the earliest Christian churches, and not being able to look away. The feeling of a painted eye that seems to follow you as you move. The feeling of a face arranged into an expression of serenity that produces in you something that is not serenity at all. Something closer to the feeling you get when you realize something is wrong, but you cannot identify why. The human nervous system evolved to detect threats, to find faces and read them, to notice when something is slightly off, when a smile doesn't reach the eyes, when stillness feels too still, when a presence feels wrong before the mind has processed why. These are ancient instincts. They kept us alive long before we had language for them. And religious art sits directly inside the territory those instincts were designed to detect, and it was put there deliberately. Imagine approaching Chartres Cathedral on foot as a medieval pilgrim would have approached it. You'd have been walking for days. The landscape around you is flat, the wheat plains of northern France stretching in every direction, and then above the horizon, two spires appear, rising from nothing, hovering above the fields as though the ground beneath them doesn't exist. Just stone climbing into the sky from a flat earth. This wasn't an accident of geography. It was the point. They began building Chartres in 1194 and finished it in a remarkably short span for the era. Its nave vaults rise to 37 metres, the equivalent of a 10-storey building, in open, unencumbered stone built by hands. Inside, the columns rise from plain bases to pointed arches that direct the eye upward and upward until the ceiling disappears into shadow. The stained glass windows, 176 of them, covering 2,600 square meters, appear to float in the darkness without visible support, their colors burning in the dimness like something on fire that produces no heat. A medieval peasant entering this space for the first time had no frame of reference for what they were feeling. The largest enclosed space most of them would ever stand inside. A ceiling so distant it seemed to belong to another world, light arriving in colors that existed nowhere else in their experience. And sound, absorbed and transformed by the stone until even the silence sounded different. This wasn't beautiful architecture that happened to be religious. It was a machine designed to produce a specific psychological state, to make the human body feel exactly what it was in the presence of God. Small, temporary, trembling. They knew what they were building, and they built it on purpose. In the curved recesses behind the altar at Monreale Cathedral in Sicily, the most sacred point in the entire building, and the place the architecture has been directing your eye toward since you walk through the door, there's a face. It occupies the entire curved wall, a mosaic of Christ, the Pantocrator, ruler of all, assembled from millions of pieces of coloured glass and gold set into the stone. The mosaics at Monreale cover 6,000 square meters of interior surface. Hundreds of kilograms of gold were used to make them. They were completed in roughly 5 years in the 1180s, a feat so extraordinary that scholars still debate how it was done. But none of that is why people stop when they see it. They stop because of the face, and specifically because of what the face does. It follows you. Byzantine artists positioned their holy figures to stare directly outward because the theology of the icon that held the image was a point of contact with the divine. The figure was looking out because the figure was present, looking at you specifically, aware of you specifically. The face of the Pantocrator at Monreale is deliberately asymmetrical. One side shows mercy, the other side shows judgment. The right hand is raised in blessing. The left hand holds an open book inscribed with the words Ego sum lux mundi, I am the light of the world. The gold background removes all spatial context. There is no sky, no room, no world behind the figure. Just gold. An infinite, sourceless light that places the viewer in no particular time or location. You aren't looking at a scene. You are in the presence of something that exists outside scenes entirely. This is the uncanny valley at its most deliberate. The artists who made this were not trying to paint a realistic human face. They were refusing to. A realistic face would be a man, a face that is almost a man but not quite, that is proportioned wrong, that exists in no physical space, that stares out from eternity with one eye of mercy and one eye of judgment. That is something else, something the nervous system cannot categorize as safe. They understood exactly what they were making, and they built 6,000 square meters of it. You've probably seen this image without knowing where it came from. Two cherubs, chubby cheeks, wings folded, chins resting on their hands, looking upward with expressions that have been described for 5 centuries as dreamy, innocent, serene. One of the most reproduced details in Western art history, on mugs, on greeting cards, on wrapping paper, on stamps, separated from the painting they inhabit so completely that most people who own them have no idea where they came from. They came from the Sistine Madonna, painted by Raphael in 1512 for the church of San Sisto in Piacenza. A large altarpiece, the Madonna descending from heaven with the Christ child in her arms, flanked by St. Sixtus and St. Barbara, the two cherubs resting on a ledge at the bottom. The painting was positioned behind the choir screen, facing a crucifix. The Virgin and the child are looking at the cross. Jesus, an infant held in his mother's arms, is looking toward the cross he is destined to die on. Mary's expression, which has been described for centuries as serene, is the expression of a woman who already knows what is about to happen and has accepted she cannot stop it. The cherubs are looking up toward the figures descending above them, toward a mother carrying a child toward a cross. When you understand the original context, every expression in the painting changes. What reads as serenity becomes grief held very still. What reads as innocence becomes the expression of beings who have already seen what is coming. The painting is about a mother walking her child toward his execution, witnessed by everyone in the scene and nobody able to stop it. We removed it from that context. We cropped out everything except the two figures at the bottom. We put them on merchandise and called them charming. The cherubs look the way they look because of what they are watching. We just stopped looking at what that was. In 1819, Francisco Goya was 72 years old. Deaf since his mid-40s, deeply disillusioned with a Spanish court he had served for decades, recovering from a near-fatal illness, he purchased a house on the outskirts of Madrid called the Quinta del Sordo, the House of the Deaf Man, named for a previous owner, though the name fit Goya precisely. He moved in, and then he began painting directly onto the walls. 14 murals, oil on plaster, dark, brooding, nightmarish. He never named them, never wrote about them, never showed them to anyone outside his own household. The titles were assigned by others after his death. and the paintings were only removed from the walls and transferred to canvas decades after he died, a process that damaged several of them irreversibly. One of them he painted in his dining room. He looked at it every time he ate. It shows a figure, enormous, grey, emaciated, gripping a human body in both hands. The head has already been consumed, part of the left arm too. The hands are white-knuckled, the fingers pressing into flesh. The mouth is open, and the eyes staring. Goya's Saturn doesn't look like a god in control of his power. He looks like something in the grip of a force he cannot resist. A being destroying what it loves from fear of the prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, that power once held could be taken away. He is consuming his own offspring to prevent his own destruction, and the expression on his face says clearly that he knows what he is doing and cannot stop. The figure being consumed may not be a child. Some scholars believe it is an adult, possibly a symbol of Spain itself, devoured by its own ruling power during years of civil war and political repression. Goya never said. He never explained any of it. He painted it on the wall of his room where he ate his meals, looked at it every day, and said nothing. When the painting was first shown publicly at the World's Fair in Paris in 1878, decades after Goya's death, one critic described it as disgusting without much art. It is now one of the most studied paintings in the history of Western art. It is now in the Prado in Madrid. People stand in front of it for a long time. What they're looking at is a god who is afraid, a divine being all-powerful, consuming what it loves, because the alternative is losing everything. That expression is not what we expect divinity to look like, but it might be the most honest depiction of it ever painted. In the Alsace region of France, in a monastery that also served as a hospital, dying patients looked at the same painting every day. The monastery of St. Anthony at Eisenheim treated some of the most desperate cases in medieval Europe. Plague victims, syphilis sufferers, and patients with ergotism, a disease caused by eating rye grain contaminated with fungus, known as St. Anthony's fire. Ergotism caused hallucinations. It caused a burning sensation in the limbs so intense, patients described it as fire moving through their bodies. It caused the skin to blacken and rot, and eventually fall away. It was agonizing, and it was usually fatal. These are the people who looked at the Eisenheim altarpiece every day. Matthias Grunewald painted it between 1512 and 1516. In its default closed position, the configuration patients saw most often, it showed the crucifixion. Christ on the cross at night, flanked by Mary collapsing in grief and John the Evangelist supporting her. The body is covered in sores, the skin is pitted and discoloured, the texture of flesh in advanced decomposition. The fingers are twisted into claws from the weight and the agony. The head falls to one side under the crown of thorns. It is not a serene, idealized depiction of divine sacrifice, but a body in the specific condition of the people looking at it. Rotting flesh, a face beyond pain, expression, anything the living can read as recognizable. Grunewald painted Christ with the symptoms of ergotism deliberately. The patients looking at this painting were supposed to see their own condition in the body of a god. They were supposed to understand that their torment was participation rather than suffering. That God had been where they were. That the burning in their limbs was something the divine had felt before them. This was an act of mercy. The altarpiece had two sets of folding wings. On feast days, the monks opened the wings to reveal what was inside. Bright resurrection scenes, colour and light and joy. The contrast was violent and deliberate. The same object that showed you death every day contained life inside it, waiting. The crucifixion and resurrection panels were considered by the monks to play an integral part in the healing process. The image was treatment, art as medicine, suffering depicted so precisely that it became, somehow, a source of comfort. One of the most powerful kings in the ancient world is on all fours. Nebuchadnezzar built Babylon. He conquered Jerusalem. He dreamed dreams that shook empires, and then God took his mind from him. The book of Daniel records it plainly. He was driven from men and ate grass as oxen. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. William Blake painted the moment of that transformation in 1795. Biographer Alexander Gilchrist, writing in 1863, described what he saw on the canvas: the mad king crawling like a hunted beast into a den among the rocks, his tangled golden beard sweeping the ground, his nails like vultures' talons, his wild eyes full of sullen terror. The power frame losing its semblance of humanity, bestial in its rough growth of hair. This is what divine punishment looks like in Blake's hands. Just a man on all fours, crawling, his mind gone, his humanity dissolving at the edges. The painting disturbs because of what it implies about power. Nebuchadnezzar, at his height, was untouchable, the greatest king alive, and the image shows us that between that and this, between the throne of Babylon and crawling in the dirt-eating grass, there's no wall. God's will arriving without negotiation. The face is the thing that stays with you. The eyes. Still human enough to know what has happened, still present enough to feel the terror of it. A man who still knows what he used to be. There is a philosophical idea underneath all of this. The divine, by definition, exists outside the human scale. It overwhelms, it exceeds, it confronts the mind with something so far beyond ordinary experience that the nervous system has no category for it. The theologian Rudolf Otto articulated it most precisely in 1917, the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, the mystery that causes trembling and yet compels, the holy as something simultaneously terrifying and irresistible. But Otto was describing something the Church had been building images around for 1,000 years before he found the words. The theological mainstream of medieval Christianity held that genuine encounter with the divine was by its nature overwhelming, that comfort was a lesser experience, that the image which made you feel small, confronted, exposed to something beyond your capacity to process, that image was doing something the comfortable image could never do. It was giving you an accurate experience of what the divine actually was. Every artist in this video understood the same at some level. Grunwald painted a body that looked like the dying so the dying could feel that God had been where they were. Blake painting a king losing his humanity at the edges so the viewer could feel what power meant when it arrived in the world. Raphael placing a mother and child before a cross so that what read as serenity revealed itself as grief held very still. The disturbing image was the highest ambition of religious art, to make you feel, for a moment, what it would actually be like to stand in the presence of something real, something vast, something so far outside the ordinary that the body received it the only way it could, as a kind of controlled terror. That was the point. That was always the point.